is just to start. In the context of Colombia, which is where we are, it is important to remember how many languages do we have. So here I would ask you to kindly participate. So the ones who know, great. I hope like many people probably know it. If you don't know, let's just try to guess. If I ask you how many languages are native from Colombia, let's put it in those terms. What number could you tell me? How many languages are native from Colombia? If you have to give a number, what would you say? And I wanted to, write on the chat box there. Someone is saying, Laura, 58, 63. Larry saying more than 30. Juliana says 60. Okay, many more. Less than that. Diana, 64, 78. Um, okay, so we are around, more than 30 being, the less number of languages and around 78 the highest. So yeah, you're right. Okay, the ones who are around 60, for example, that's the number that we have. So it shows that Colombia is a linguistically diverse country. Okay, however, if you ask people, like people on the streets, for example, your family members about the number, you would be surprised because we are truly, ignorant in the sense of not recognizing or acknowledging the linguistic variety that we have. So this is an important starting point. Now let's advance. Somebody said, Andres, I think 83, the country with the most family languages around the world. There are countries that could have probably more languages. Colombia has 13 linguistic families, okay, but for example, the linguistic diversity in Papua New Guinea is, super dense. So, but I invite you to go and explore those latitudes if you want to, Andres. Okay, now let's do another quick exercise. Okay, here I have a true and false exercise. Okay, so I'll be presenting there on the screen different statements, and I would like you to take some of those and also type them in the chat box if they are true or if they are false. Okay, I will be reading them, and then you will decide which ones to choose. So languages we know are those we learn at the school in institutions. Foreign languages are learned separately or in a linear fashion. Learning languages means learning to handle all skills simultaneously. False friends are an obstacle to learning a foreign language. Successful communication only occurs through a common language shared by all speakers. A foreign language teacher is exclusively a teacher of one language. And I have some more over here. Let me try to advance. There are 10 language teachers should avoid intrusion of other languages in the classroom. Promoting other languages in my classroom endangers the future of my discipline. The language curriculum makes no room for intercomprehension, and intercomprehensive approaches aim to replace the ones we usually use in the foreign language classroom. So take one or two and tell me, what do you think? Are these statements true or false? Do you align with them? Do you have a different perspective if you consider these issues that I am presenting right there? So again, once again, I invite you all to, kindly answer there in the chat box if you think these statements are true, or in the opposite, if you think that they are false. Take a position, okay? Like, well, to me, for example, 4 is true. Let's imagine, okay? Or to me, number 7 is also true. So let me see here in the chat box. Okay, Juliana says number 1 is false. Okay. What about the other people that we have in our session today? 4, Diana says false. 1 and 7 is false, says Larry. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Diana, for participating. Let's give 10, 15 more seconds to see if there are more responses there. Let me double check. I know we are like 19 people connected. Okay, so let's see if we get some more insights on this little exercise. Okay, so Karen says number 1 false, 2 I don't know, and 7 false. Okay, good. So here we are, in the field of experts. Okay, so all of us have been exposed to learning languages. So all of us have ideas related to it that are informed. However, all that we have here is, fake, or it is false. Okay, all these statements that I showed over there are false. So I invite you to think about how many times we have been in places or scenarios in which these ideas, monolithical ideas, okay, of learning a language, are reproduced and are replicated as true statements. So try to think about it, and it's also try to think about our teaching experience, assuming that some of us are teachers. Okay, so this is just to introduce what I'll be presenting today. Now let's move on to this statement or to the problem. I work at this university, as Juliana pointed out before, the Licenciatura en Lenguas Modernas, con énfasis en inglés y francés at Universidad Javeriana in Bogotá. And this semester, I was in charge of a class called Methodology and Didactics of Languages, okay? So I was working with 17 student teachers. They are in the semester, the first semester of this year, being around fifth, sixth semester of their bachelor's degree. And before, this class was taught divided in modules. So the first part of the semester was taught in English and the second part in French, or the opposite. They had a French teacher at the very beginning and an English teacher at the second part. However, we decided, okay, what if we try to use all the linguistic repertoires that students have in the same class? This is not a languages classroom. I mean, this is not an English or a French class. It's a pedagogy class that is taught in the languages the students are learning. So we started implementing that possibility, and a colleague and I, we were chosen, okay, as the teachers for guide this class. And what we decided to do was to simply allow people to use all the languages that they had at disposal. Okay, I didn't say the first part of the semester is going to be English only, the second part it's going to be French only, but you can use the languages that you want to use in the way you want to use. And of course, there were pedagogical decisions related to what was being implemented in the class. Now, this is what we try to do. If we think about programas de licenciatura at large, we could be asking ourselves how many of these programs are fostering multilingual practices in the classrooms. Probably, okay, most of them just promote one language, even if they are multilingual. That was my experience, for example, at Universidad Pedagógica Nacional, where I did my bachelor's degree in education. Okay, so we had English separated from French. Think about the teachers. Do English or French teachers or English and other languages teachers collaborate, talk to each other, develop projects and ensemble, okay, together? So, well, there we go. Now, to state it clearly, okay, even if we have in Colombia multilingual realities, okay, and students may have plurilingual backgrounds, teacher education programs often remain bound to monolingual paradigms, okay? We may praise bilingualism and we say, okay, we're learning more in Spanish. But within the languages classrooms, it seems to be that there is still a dominant monolingual paradigm, particularly privileging English. Yeah, and it's happening. And I see it here in the context where I work, and I have seen it throughout my experience. These, okay, disconnect, okay, limits the development of pedagogies that acknowledge and enhances the students' full linguistic repertoires. That's why it was possible to drive this experience within a class of pedagogy. Therefore, there is a need probably to explore how translanguaging and intercomprehension, I will go deeper into those aspects later today, can challenge these norms and foster more inclusive, culturally responsive teaching practices in pre-service teacher education. And I also brought some ideas from my students in the class. When I was working on the template, to me, it was difficult to say that this is a research project. It started as a pedagogical implementation, and little by little, it's been making sense. So that's why you see, like this element over there, like scratched, like it's not officially had research, but it's more like questions on the go. So we may ask ourselves, okay, how reservist teachers perceive and engage with their multilingual trajectories in a translingual classroom environment? What happens, okay, when they are able or when they are invited to use more than one language? What are the roles of translanguaging and intercomprehension in shaping the reflections and practices of future language educators? It's different if I say, this is French class and we only use French, or this is English only, compared to inviting people to use all the possibilities that they have, all the linguistic repertoires that they may have. And another question that we may ask is, which are the tensions, okay, between monolingual expectations and plurilingual or translingual practices fostered in the classroom? In the plenary, that was the question at the end. What are we going to do with assessment? Okay, how can we offer courses that are not just concentrated on one hegemonic language at times? So I wanted to explore linguistic biographies, okay, and multilingual identities, linguistic biographies as a possibility to go deeper into the trajectories of individuals. Secondly, from a pedagogical approach, what would happen if me as a teacher changes the language, in the classroom? Okay, what if I allow them to use or invite them to use from an intercomprehensive perspective all the languages they have learned, and which are the possible tensions and opportunities that can be identified when implementing these particular linguistic or plurilingual practices in monolingual teacher educational contexts. Okay, so this is what I try to do. To inform this theoretically, we just heard a plenary about intercomprehension, so I'm not going to go deeper there. I just want to simply pinpoint that the work started, or part of this work was started in France, okay? Um, in the European context, all the borders, okay, are multilingual, let's say, okay? In the context of Colombia as well, in the context of Latin America as well, but we have a different history. So the work by Melo Pfeiffer, Arejo Santos, Calvo Muñoz, Angela Muñoz, Francisco Calvo are important to understand how intercomprehension is coming from the multilingual approaches, okay, or the enfoques plurales de lenguas, as they are called, can be implemented and used in classes. We saw some examples of textbooks, okay, that can be used to foster this perspective. That is the well-recognized work by Ofelia Garcia and Li Wei and by Yesid Ortega, in which they are showing how translingual practices are present in societies. Okay, so little by little, okay, we have been having the chance to include them in our linguistic and scenarios being understood as classrooms, but throughout history, people have been using translingual practices. Probably we didn't name them like that before, but they have been present. And secondly, there is this idea of a linguistic biography. A linguistic biography in this class, this particular experience was a tool to get to know my students more, to get to know which are the languages that they learned, the way they learned them, how do they feel, which are the expectations they had when learning a language and another. And the linguistic repertoire is all the discursive practices that are available to you and that you can use in a particular communicative in quotation setting or in quotation scenario. And of course, all of these aspects foster critical language awareness. If you see on purpose, I have selected, okay, authors and scholars from the global north, if we want to call it like that, and the south, or people that we may know, like Yolanda Zamacá, okay, and Arismendi Gomez, people who are from the context, who are Colombians and who are working on this. And I think this is also important. There is local knowledge being developed. There are people working on these ideas, and it is our duty probably or responsibility as teachers to continue enhancing and promoting these type of reflections. Okay, so what has been done? A lot. Okay, at my doctoral thesis, I'm working on mapping out the ELT field, and at least these 5 journals in the local context have contributed a lot. Okay, so I just leave them there for you to go and explore, because there are tons of contributions that started back in 1972, and from that point, okay, they have been publishing, okay, and sharing with the community articles related to the topics we have been addressing in these academic events. Okay, so there is a lot there, and some of all of these publications are available online, so you can go and explore them. The methodology, as I said before, it didn't originate, okay, as a research project per se, but little by little it got its characteristics. Okay, so the context, I already mentioned that one here at the university. Number of participants 17 plus me as a teacher. If we want to frame it into these traditional or well-known ways of conducting research, I would call it like a qualitative design or paradigm. Okay, it followed a case study, which were this particular group of students, and I have used different elements or instruments such as these linguistic biographies, classroom recordings, written pieces, and reflections in our sessions. And it had a pedagogical experience, or it had a pedagogical implementation. The point here is that we were all the time, and when I say we, is that teachers like me and my students, we were all the time thinking, reading, and making sense. That was the homework. You have to think, you have to read if it accepts the imperative, and we have to make sense of what's happening. At the very beginning, it was difficult. Si je commence à parler dans une autre langue maintenant, vous allez être comme, what? Qu'est-ce que le prof est en train de dire? Like, you'll be a little bit lost. Like, what is this teacher saying? But taking into consideration their linguistic biographies, it was possible. Okay, so they were exposed to a plurality of languages, and little by little, we started making sense. As this is a pedagogy class, we had a lot of writing and a lot of sharing in class, and of course, discussions and reflections related to what was going on. Okay, all of a sudden, we had people like the teacher talking in English, for example, and someone replying to that teacher to me in Spanish, and then another person using French. And then I switched to French, and it was like it's been all the semester like that, and we are getting now close to the end. So it's been an interesting experience. What happened? Okay, so the reading class exercises, it required a careful observation from my part. Okay, I was paying attention to, well, the type of interactions they were having, who preferred to use one language or another in one way. Okay, why at times when I push them, okay, now let's do it in French. They were like, no, teacher, but why not in English? Or, okay, it's totally okay if I do it in French. Okay, so little by little we started working on that, and here you see some question marks as I am on the go. Okay, so I have not fully, completed the analysis. So what I will be presenting now are some preliminary findings. Okay. So here are some of the ideas that my students shared with me, okay? And this came out from the linguistic biographies we wrote. So just to give you an example, there was an instruction in the classroom, so students were able to write them, and little by little we were reflecting upon them. So each language that I found in my life corresponds to a particular type of viewing, okay? Whether if it comes from books, from videos, from my dreams, from my meetings with other people. Además, aprendí el francés, el chino, el huitoto en la universidad. So at times, students have linguistic biographies that are way wider than the ones that we may think. The fact that I am teaching English does not mean that I am going to exclude all the linguistic biographies my students have. Then English, for example, for this particular person became escape for him or herself. And the relationship with the languages is like amor-odio, because when I want to speak in English, I mix it with other languages like French. So they're showing, interestingly, what's happening with the brain, okay, what's happening with the cognitive capacity for students, but at the same time, it's showing us the emotions and the feelings attached to a particular use in a classroom. So I think, from my perspective, it enriches a lot teaching scenario in a teaching classroom. Then, in general, because I didn't know what to expect, so I was like, okay, let's see how it goes. Probably they would hate the experience, probably they would like it. But in general terms, it was a positive experience. And here I highlight some aspects related to it. So a person said, nosotros debemos ser versátiles al momento de enseñar. Not being in the monolingual paradigm, I think that may contribute to pedagogy. There are particular ways each language may have its hegemonic way of being taught. When we challenge this, when we dismantle this possibility, I think that the approach to pedagogy and the approach to teaching languages may be enriched at the same time, okay? They also said, for example, that yo puedo expresar opiniones sin restricción de solo poder hablar o expresarnos en inglés, francés o español. So at times we as teachers could be restrictive. English only. That's what I put it at the title of this presentation. And I remember, for example, at my undergrad program, I was not allowed to use Spanish in a French class. And I had no exposure to French before my first semester of French. So it was a load to me, but at the end it ended well, let's say, but it was complicated. What if we can change a little bit this perspective? It boosts second language acquisition processes by challenging the brain. Somebody said there, Juliana said they don't mingle. Okay, so it is there, it happens. And it's okay because you are being aware of what's going on with your brain when you are learning a language. So I think that this is also relevant and this is also important, and we can connect it with linguistic theory, with pedagogical theories, with psycholinguistics and neurolinguistics and psychology and so on. And they also said that this is like una cucharadita de curiosidad. So people are curious about what might happen in a classroom like this. So if we have it, I am sure that I am promoting reflection, that learning is enhanced and people are willing to learn and to see what's going on. These are some preliminary findings related to increased awareness, language practices, and its implications. Okay, so translanguaging is a possibility there. We as teachers should increase our awareness to be able to promote it, or to at least drive some reflections in the class. It's not that I am awakening people, but more that I am able to discuss, that I am able to show other possibilities related to plurilingual realities. And the part that I consider could be a little bit complicated to handle is how these perspectives may challenge monolingual teaching, and may also challenge the ways we have been taught and we have learned about being educated as a teacher. Yeah, because el profe de inglés, o el profe de francés, o el profe de español. But that is not really, el profe así en abstracto de lenguas. It does not exist because we are claiming, this is my little part. So I am the English teacher. But what if we change a little bit? Of course, it might have implications to assessment, to curriculum design, to materials development. But I think that the ones that are being developed in Brazil, for example, show, or the projects of Europe show some aspects. So I don't have truly, possible conclusions there. I would like to read your comments or to know your comments, reactions, and insights related to these. But I think that with this little exercise throughout this semester, I was able to problematize or even transform preservist teachers' views on language use and pedagogy. It was evident. They were like, okay, it's another way possible. Of course, acknowledging the linguistic repertoires may encourage inclusive and socially responsive teaching practices. We talk a lot about it, but why I cannot use another language that I know? I even have some samples. Un estudiante que me escribió en japonés. Yo no sé japonés. So when I read it, I was like, okay, I will go and check and explore. So Google Lens helped me and it translated and I was able to, get that particular sort of insights. And then institutional change is needed, okay, to reconcile teacher education curricula with multilingual realities of learners and educators and to the multilingual realities of Colombia. So here are some of the references, and I think I am good with the timing. So thank you all for listening. Gracias. Thank you, merci, obrigado, danke. And here also in Colombian Sign Language. Gracias por escuchar. Y I'm willing, to listen to you, to listen to your comments, questions, reactions, and that's it.
Thank you, Andres Felipe, for your insights and presentation and about your research project. Well, we can have a couple of minutes for the audience to write their comments or questions. Anyways, I would like to start asking a little bit about this research project, especially because you mentioned that well, I believe that we can make some curricular and institutional changes, right? Based on what you have showed today. So, what institutional or curriculum changes do you think are necessary to sustain these kind of aspects like translanguaging and intercompensation practices that you mentioned? Beyond these isolated practices, like the one that you mentioned in your context.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Glenn. It's a difficult part, okay? To modify curriculum or curricula at institutions takes long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
To tell the Ministerio de Educación that, we have not even fully understood that bilingualism does not mean Spanish and English. And when in the Ley General de Educación they said, well, people are going to learn another language, it was not simply English. So I cannot imagine how would it take to the Ministry of Education to understand that there are many more possibilities than simply using one language in a particular classroom. So I think it would take longer. However, there are small actions that we can take. In my
Mm-hmm.
context of work, for example, we have been modifying what was called La Directriz de Lengua, okay,
Mm-hmm.
which privileged the use of certain languages only, okay. We have
Mm-hmm.
also been able to open classes of native languages, in particular lengua de señas de Colombia and lenguas nativas, Huitoto and Creole Haitiano. So I think if little by little institutions start, opening spaces to teach
Mm-hmm.
other
Yeah.
languages and to make connections between those, we are doing the job. In
Yeah.
my context as well, I've had the opportunity to develop a sort of partnership with some universities in Brazil, Universidad de Paraíba, Federal de Paraíba in Brazil, and Universidad de Salamanca in Spain. And we had an intercomprehensive practice. So we were together in a classroom, and I
Mm-hmm.
had people from Brazil, people from Spain, students from languages from this university, and we were doing intercomprehension applied in practice.
Mm-hmm.
So I think at times we tend to think that, okay, this is the duty of my boss, the director of the program, the deans or the vice-rectores or the principals of the institutions. But I think that we can do little actions. If you are interested in doing that, tell me. Okay, I will be more than happy in the coming semester to open a space with you and to collaborate. It
Yeah.
does not mean that we should have people from all parts of the world, but little by little, those small actions can contribute to the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, as teachers or the ones who are teaching teachers or preservist teachers, it's our responsibility to open the discussion to these topics. Yeah. If we
Mm-hmm.
keep replicating and reproducing these monolingual paradigms, this is not going to change. Okay. But if little by little we are starting, raising the awareness of the new generations,
Mm-hmm.
I think it would have an impact. To my
Yeah.
students at the end of the semester, it was totally okay to move from one language to another.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And we did an intercomprehension practice. So they were looking for, okay, en rumano, en occitano, en sardo, ¿esto cómo es?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know Sarto. I am not an Occitan speaker, but I understand what's my pedagogical decision there. And I think those small aspects would be contributing to, in one day or another, have big curriculum or curricular transformations.
And it also depends on the student's background and language knowledge, right? That you can make these decisions in your class.
Yeah, they are informed through the context, but I am sure like nowadays in contemporary society, many more people are being exposed to many more languages than before, I think.
Okay, thank you, Andres. And also we have a couple of questions also from the audience. Laura Trujillo raised her hand, so you can activate your mic and ask your question or comment.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much.
Hi, Laura.
Hola, Felix. Well, thank you. First of all, Felipe, very interesting exercise that you are carrying out with this course. It's interesting because actually I just had the experience at Centro de Lenguas from Universidad Javeriana, and they are trying to do something that is quite similar in terms of, translanguaging and the use of Spanish in this case, because it's an English course. But what I found there that I think it's interesting, related to what you're doing, because I was teaching people who are not teachers, who are not going to be teachers or anything. They just want to learn English because of different reasons. And I found a very similar problem that you found at the beginning of your course. And it was like, they didn't want to use Spanish, even though they were allowed to do so. I would say, like, okay, if you can't say something in English, you can just, tell me or ask, and then we can go from there. But they were, even though they were stuck with a work or something, they wouldn't use Spanish. And these are people, again, that are not teachers or anything. And the fact that, when you are talking about pre-service teachers, I then think about, farther than only policy and stuff. What do you think that should happen? Is it more like about changing the way we are teaching pre-service teachers, to take into account the importance of that? Also considering that, language learning, it's more like a economical and social, it has a social and economic agenda behind, so all this discourse comes a little bit from that place. So, well, I don't know, like, what do you think it's going to happen then, if we want, or what should happen if we want to change this a little bit?
Okay, thank you, Laura. And there are probably a couple of concepts that may help. Number one is trying to understand what's going on with the linguistic ideologies and the linguistic attitudes people are having. Yeah, because it's part of their mentality. If they learn that learning a language should be fully immersed in English, they are going to be waiting teachers to do it. Okay, so what we need to try to do is to say, hey, look, this is a bilingual brain. These are the characteristics of a bilingual brain. If you understand, for example, that the syntactic structure of English and Spanish are the same, sujeto más verbo más objeto, it's going to be easier to you. Okay, if you understand that there are elements that resemble and that are elements that differ, being able to compare the languages, I think we are doing more. So yeah, unfortunately, these have been ideologies imposed and attitudes replicated. So I think we should call students' attention on that particular fact. Okay, and teachers, we at times suffer a lot. It's easier to me to say, es esto, ya, se acabó. Se resuelve el problema de comunicación, la incomprensión, but we struggle. And we have teachers, mimicking and drawing and screaming. Eso está muy bien. That's great. But why to make it so difficult? Why to add so much cognitive load when it could be easier? So I think that's a possibility. Secondly, teachers ourselves, we should to rethink a lot about the way we understand teaching languages. I was educated and raised from a perspective in which the idea was to use this goal language all the time. I think that today technologies are changing that super quickly. Okay. I was surprised this week because I found a device that simply it listens and it translates, and you have on your earbuds, or as you want to call them, the translation. So probably the ways we teach and the ways we use languages are being transformed, and it is our responsibility to work on that. And third, I think that classrooms are good scenarios to try out things. let's see how it goes. Probably it works. Probably it might work for certain people, but not for others. But we as teachers should be able to say, okay, with this particular individual, it's easier if I use both languages. To this particular individual, it's easier if I just fully immerse that person into English. To this one, it's better if I build up, certain scaffolds, and then person is going to be able to move from there. So I think there is a lot to do, but all depends, as Juliana was pointing out, on the characteristics and the particularities of the context. And yeah, if we challenge curricula, then we are challenging power issues. So we need to think from a glottopolitical perspective, what's the relationship between power and the use of languages? And this is a discussion that's open, I think.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, for your question and comments. And Andres Felipe, thank you so much for participating in this research, this research congress. And thank you so much to the audience for giving your comments. And do not forget to also participate in the links that I share with you in the chat box to evaluate the presentation. And again, thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. Bye bye. Take care.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.